and welcome to The Black Room. This is the podcast for all things erotic mind control, and I'm your host, Calidus. And welcome back. It has been just a little while, hasn't it? I'm happy to report that the reason I have been away for so long, and it's been a month or more at this point since the last episode, episode 7, and the reason I've been away all this time is not due to death or infirmary or any other kind of tragic situation, but rather because I have been busy, and happily, I have been predominantly busy working on naughty erotic mind control goodies, many of which I'm going to be sharing with you now and in the coming weeks as well. This episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the pieces that I've been working on that I have been given permission to share with you, and I'll explain what that means. Also going to talk about an upcoming comic book issue, upcoming mind control comic that you're going to want to check out. If you've listened to the show in the past, you probably have a good idea of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about some interesting mind control tie-in with a video game that I've been playing recently. I'm going to talk about an artist on Tumblr that you absolutely have to check out. Very talented and going to be of great interest to you if you are a fan of erotic mind control. And then last up, we're going to have the first part of an epic interview, a really, really fun conversation between myself and Madame Kistulat. And that is going to be coming up in the bottom half of the program. But first, let's talk a little bit about what I've been working on while I've been away. I do commission work from time to time, but recently I just had this interesting circumstance come about where I ended up picking up 3 commission jobs in very close proximity to each other, just one right after another. As I was in the middle of or finishing up a piece, somebody would email, and then the same thing happened again. And I've never had overlap like this. So for the last month or so, a little bit longer, I guess, I have been working on these 3 commission projects. And that's very fun. It's very enjoyable. But what is sometimes frustrating about commission work is that I end up doing things that I really like, I'm very proud of, but I don't have the opportunity to share. Now, sometimes my patrons will choose to share the things that I've done for them. I've seen at least one that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, although perhaps there's another, but at least one commission job that I did that featured a celebrity model, a commission piece that I had done years ago. Eventually, I guess the patron put it online and it wound up on Tumblr, and I ran across it at one point. But by and large, that does not happen. Or at least it certainly doesn't happen for me. If my patrons decide to do it, that's fine. I have no problem with it. But it's just that they're paying for it. And in some cases, it's private. The things that are actually in the minute might be personal to them. It might use their name. It might be personal pictures that they've sent, things like that. So, for various reasons, it just isn't practical for the commissions that I do to be put on my website, and I don't ever ask people to do this. But recently, I had a situation come up where I had the patron actually approach me about posting the work to my website. And what had happened, just to give you a little bit of backstory, I had a person get in touch with me and explain that they were a very big fan, or are a very big fan, of the transsexual porn star Mariana Cordoba, and inquired about me doing a few commission pieces featuring her. So they sent a number of images along with some ideas, and I looked them over, we talked, and I ended up doing 5 animations from this group of images that this person sent. And I sent them off. They said they liked them. I was happy. They were happy. And I just assumed that was the end of it. But then they got back in touch with me and emphatically suggested, not to say that they were pushy, they were very friendly about it, but they were almost like a salesperson trying to sell me on something. And what they were trying to sell me on is that I should post these to my website. And I talked about it with them and just said, okay, well, here's some things to be aware of, and you need to just know this, that, and the other before we do this. So we talked about it, and I let them select 3 images from the 5 that we had, or that I had done. And those 3 I just posted to my website this evening, actually, before I started recording this. So if you go to my website right now, and of course there will be a link in the show notes, but if you go to my website right now, there is a new post up called New Animations Marina Cordoba Series. They ended up being a lot of fun, and I got to utilize some interesting techniques. I think one of the ones that was really a favorite for me, it's called Resistance, and of the 3 that I've posted, this is the one that required just a little bit of alteration. It's a turning the tables style manip, which I guess that term is probably out of date at this point. It's a viewer gets hypnotized style image, and the first place that I encountered that kind of photo manip was on Private Page's site almost 20 years ago now, and I did a lot of early pieces in that style with hypnodoms and so forth, and it was very fun to revisit that and to bring it to life with animation. And it was something that my patron had requested specifically. As a matter of fact, out of all the 5 that I did in this series, this is the one that my patron had the most specific ideas on. They requested specific kinds of things, like number 1, they wanted it to be in this turning the tables style manip where the model, Miss Cordoba in this case, is hypnotizing the viewer. She's looking right into camera, and she's sitting in front of this very large TV, and the patron wanted like a subliminal programming feed to be playing on the TV. They supplied me with a couple of video clips that they wanted to be included, and they had some specific text that they wanted to appear on the screen. And that's the only thing about this that's different in what you will see at the site and what they received with their commission order is that the text is gone, just because it used their name and had some specific instructions that were key to their sensibilities. So that's the only thing that's different about that piece, though. And it was actually really, really fun to work on that specific style of image. I haven't done it in a long time, and revisiting it and finding a way to create that style of image, which if you've ever seen, usually it's a very short caption, just a sentence or 2, which I usually put at the bottom, glowing text, and this ghostly sort of mist-like effect around the text gives it this kind of dreamlike quality, very ethereal. And again, I am stealing this hook, line, and sinker from Private Pages. I loved it. I loved it when they did it, and when the site went away, I did a few myself, just because I love the aesthetic of it so much, and it was really fun to recreate that, but find a way to animate it, find a way to put motion to it as well, so that it wouldn't just be static text on top of this image that had moving video in it. So that was really fun. I enjoyed that enormously, and I've got images that I'm thinking about right now that I might go and revisit this, maybe do a small little series and do this again with some other pictures I have saved for my own collection. The other 2 pieces, my patron said that they were very, very pleased with, very excited about, and I think that these 2 specifically were instrumental in this whole suggestion of posting these and sharing these. These other 2 are more in my usual style in that it's Miss Cordoba, the model, being mind controlled through some means. The first piece It's called TikTok, and it is the first piece. It's the first of this series that I did, and it has Miss Cordova sitting in this chair with this great trance expression on her face, and she looks totally fixated on her massive erection. And if you've never seen pictures of Mariana Cordova, she's very well endowed. And my patron's note for this particular image was, looks like Mariana's mesmerized by her own cock. And that really kickstarted my imagination. And so I ended up utilizing the animation technique from Priestess, where I have this animated snake, which seems ironic now in hindsight. But anyway, the animation technique that I used in that piece, I thought I would use here. And so I created this animation that has this sort of metronome-like quality, rocking back and forth, but trying to make it biologically plausible. So it sort of looks correct. And it really became a great leaping off point for the story. It's set in, it looks like a hotel just based on the furniture and this, the curtains in the background and that kind of thing. But it led me to kind of try to explain why it looks like a hotel. I set it in a hypnotherapist's office and turned it into this whole scenario where Mariana is in the middle of a session and she's being indoctrinated again. This is an ongoing process, and the hypnotherapist is using a metronome, and the rhythm of the metronome is tied to all the things that are going on with her physically and mentally. It was just this one short sentence that my patron had written for this image, but it really kickstarted my imagination and just was the leaping off point for the whole thing. And it really set the tone for all of the work that would follow. And it was a lot of fun. And so the third piece, the other piece that's uploaded right now, is called Check-In. And it's a great pick, but it's one of those images where her eyes are closed. And in those cases, I go to the old standby, the brainwashing visor. Perfect mind control implement for those kinds of pictures. And again, I'm describing it. If you've not seen it, then you'll just have to bear with me. But the pose and the framing of the photo really make her cock the focal point of the image. And while I didn't want to completely recycle this idea that I had used in the last one in TikTok, I thought I had to do something else with this animation technique just because the image kind of screamed for it. And so I ended up, doing this animation yet again, but this time it was more about kind of communicating this urgent, desperate level of arousal, this aching need. And I thought it turned out really well, and it was interesting how sort of the character of the animation, at least to me, I don't know if everyone will agree, but at least to me, the character of the animation set a markedly different tone in this image as opposed to the other. And it's just one of those things that I found very satisfying artistically. When I got to the end of it, I really had enjoyed the process of discovery and kind of figuring out how to accomplish this, and then also how to kind of use it to some dramatic or aesthetic end. Now, in this case, I didn't try to clever up some idea for why it looks like it's in a hotel. I just set it in a hotel. Basically, I got lazy, is what I did with this one. But this image actually inspired, I think, the longest caption. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, this is the longest caption. I can't remember. It's close to 800 words, I want to say. But in any case, it inspired the longest caption of the of the 5 that I worked on, and it was a lot of fun to write. Just did this story about a very flirtatious, very friendly concierge that checks Miss Cordova into this nice posh hotel and hands her a little something from compliments of the spa here at the hotel, and she gets to her room and it's a visor. It must be one of those electrolyte therapy visors. So she puts this thing on, and of course, by the time the concierge makes it back up to the room to check on her, she's in a very different frame of mind, and the fun continues from there. So anyway, I had a great time doing this, and while I'm not going to mention my patron by name, I do just want to thank them for letting me share these pieces. It's not something that I get to do too often with commission pieces, and as they said, I don't have any work in my catalog that features TS models, so this is a nice change of pace in that sense as well. But anyway, if it sounds like the sort of thing that tickles your fancy, you should go check those out. And again, the link will be in the show notes, which you can always find at podcast.calidus-mc.com. All right, you knew this was coming, and here it is, the preview, the reminder that Core issue number 9 is coming out this week. Of course, on the show before, I have talked about the amazing Core comic book series, which is written by my good friend and amazing author, Tavico, and the artwork is created in Poser by the equally talented and amazing Uzubono. And these two have been working together on Core for, well, obviously for 8 issues, but I'm trying to think about how much time that encompasses. I guess it's maybe 2 years or more at this point since the first issue came out. It's been a fantastic series. It's going to be coming out on Friday, October the 23rd, unless you took the survey that they issued after Core 8 came out, in which case you're going to get it 2 days early on October 21st. I mentioned the survey on the show. I told you I'm going to take the survey because I want to get this issue early, and I totally procrastinated and forgot about it and didn't take the survey, and so now I have to wait until Friday along with everybody else who didn't get their act together and check it out. But anyway, if you're one of the early crew, Wednesday the 21st. Otherwise, you'll be reading it with me on October the 23rd, and you will be reading it with me because it is awesome. If you don't know anything about Core, if this is the first you're hearing about it, let me just say in brief that as I said, it's a 3D Poser comic book. It's set in a futuristic sci-fi setting, a large urban metropolis, and Core is a group of cops who have been enhanced with abilities, super speed and strength and things like that, but they are also mind controlled for optimum performance, in air quotes. That's sort of the cover story. But of course, there's other things going on behind the scenes that you find out about as the series goes on. One of the big story threads that is happening right now is Core has been investigating a hive facility who have these factories all over the city, hidden, in warehouses and under buildings and things like that. And this hive disappears citizens and transforms them into these slick gray drone women. And, they all look identical. Once you've been through this transformation process, which involves nanites altering your DNA and your physical body structure, whatever you look like before, you come out looking like one of these gray drone women. And it is exceptionally hot. It's terrific. There's excellent characters. There's great drama. The aspects of the story that tie into things that you've probably read in other pieces of mind control fiction. There's hive infiltration. You've got lots of naughty mind control and different styles of mind control, different induction techniques, and you see it working in different characters in different ways. Obviously, the hive has transformation and brainwashing style mind control, but there's different kinds of mind control that other characters will use. There's a lot of girl sex. There's fun Easter eggs. If you are a fan of the mind control community, there's references to authors and things like that, and terrific poser art from Uzubono. As I mentioned, it's a great series. It's one of my favorite things going on right now in Mind Control Erotica. Pick it up this week. Speaking of drone women, I have been playing a video game recently called Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. You don't need to know a lot about the video game in order to have context for what I'm going to tell you about, but I'll just tell you in brief so you have a little bit of grounding. This game is set in 1983, 1984. It's a fictitious alternate history kind of story. You play a character who is this soldier, this legendary figure in military circles and private military forces, which is a big concern that the game deals with. And Big Boss has a private army, and he is on a mission of revenge. He was wronged 9 years ago, and they almost killed him. He was in a coma. Then he woke up, and now he's back, and he's going after the people that did him wrong. And the main antagonist in the game is this Skullface looking guy called Skullface. Happily enough, he's got a private army of his own, but he also has an elite force of soldiers called the Parasite Unit. And the Parasite Unit are these terrifying, almost Borg-like soldiers that have strangely supernatural abilities, or nigh supernatural abilities. They can summon mist. They can move in the blink of an eye. They're incredibly strong. They can become invisible at times. They're almost unkillable. And they wear this strange body armor with all these hoses on it. Sometimes they'll have these gas masks on. And they will sometimes move in this very almost zombie-like, decrepit kind of way until they spot you, until they find you, and then they're lightning quick and they're just coming after you, and you're just running for your life at that point. And they're used very, very effectively as a tool for fear in the game. There is also a mind control aspect to the Parasite Unit, however. They behave like drones, not autonomous soldiers. And they can also take control of people and turn them into these zombie-like puppets. And you see this happen a couple of times in the game. These sort of third-party soldiers will suddenly become infected with some sort of particles or something that are in this mist that the skulls can summon. And it kind of takes them over, and they stand up and they have these glowing blue eyes, and then they're sort of obeying the skull's commands, and they kind of walk around in this almost puppet on string zombie-like gait that's very unnerving. So I recently played this mission where you run into a squad of female parasite soldiers, and they are basically the drone women from out of your fantasies. They have these big headphones completely covering their ears, one eye covered by this Borg-style red LED eyepiece. The rest of their outfit is basically fetish wear that shows off a lot of skin. Their skin, speaking of which, is this dull gray color. They have their unit number tattooed on their foreheads. Their heads are all shaved bald. They look identical to each other. And they're terrifying in the context of the game. They're very formidable. But basically, whoever did the character design for this squad created a recipe from all of my favorite Hive stories featuring girl drones. It's fantastic. It's really, really great stuff. I recorded a short video clip that basically introduces them. It's the moment in the game where you meet up with them for the first time, and there's this clip that really shows them off, and it's a minute and change long. But anyway, I put it on my YouTube channel, and you can go check that out. If you're watching this on YouTube, just click on the channel name. You can go see it. Otherwise, check the show notes. But if you're a fan of that kind of Borg woman, cyborg woman, drone lady, mind-controlled hive thing, you want to go check this out. It's really, really cool. And speaking of something really, really cool, I recently stumbled onto an artist on Tumblr called Sleepy Gimp. And Sleepy Gimp does traditional art, again, air quotes. They're an illustrator, but I'm assuming that what they're doing is digital illustration. But Sleepy Gimp does terrific, terrific illustrative work and just has this terrific style, really detailed, great use of color. He draws these comic book-esque, exaggerated female forms, and his work features a lot of really fun, sexy stuff. Femdom content runs throughout what he does. There's this one character that's featured very prominently is Evelina LaFay, and she's forever, getting into naughty situations. There's bondage stuff. There's dominance and submission, big breasts, serious foot fetish stuff. If you have any inklings whatsoever in foot fetish stuff, you really want to check this out. Some great stuff there. I'm not a huge foot fetish fan, and even I can really appreciate and get into this. Obvious how much passion the artist has for this. And then, of course, mind control. One Piece is flat out erotic hypnosis. Evelina LaFay swinging this green jewel in front of this blonde's eyes who is total trance face, completely mesmerized by this, and you can imagine what sort of naughty things are going to happen immediately following. But it is hinted at or inferred in a lot of the pieces that he does. Most of his stuff is female dominating female. There's at least one that I'm aware of that's female dominates male. All of it is fantastic. Again, incredibly talented artist. Really need to go check him out. Look for the link in the show notes or Google Sleepy Gimp. He's on DeviantArt, but the really good stuff, the stuff that I'm referring to specifically, is on his Tumblr, and I can't recommend him enough. Just it's rare to find somebody who is this talented, who also dials in so many of the things that I like within the fetish and on the periphery of the fetish. Sleepy Gimp. Go check him out. Now, speaking of artists, that is just one of the many subjects that I discuss with my guest on this episode of the show. She is a prodigious author. She is a fan, patron, and promoter of many wonderful and talented artists and illustrators in the mind control community. And she's also something of an erotic mind control scholar as well, having done some in-depth analysis on Trilby Ellis, Tabaco, and other EMC authors that she and I share a great appreciation for. Please join me in welcoming to the Black Room, Madame Keystoulat.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You are welcome. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the show is because looking at your list of influences, of authors that have influenced you, authors that you are a fan of, your list is essentially identical to my own. So
I did notice that.
We should have a lot to talk about in regards to mind control fiction, because number one, you know a lot about mind control fiction. You read quite a bit, you comment quite a bit, you're very active in that regard. You've written an incredible amount of mind control fiction. I think that your story count is something like 98 stories right now on the archive.
Yeah, it hit that a couple weeks ago, I think.
Right. So, and the amount of work that you've been able to do is really remarkable. And a lot of your work is built around a comic book mythos that you originated. Was the first story The Adventures of Silver Girl, or is there something that predates that kind of sets up that whole mythology?
That was the first story, and originally I really didn't have anything huge planned. I was actually still in high school at the time, and I was having a lot of fun. It actually started out as a role play, and I kept telling friends about the world that was building out of it, the characters, until eventually it was just like, wait, I've always been wanting to write huge big stories, why don't I just turn it into a story? And that's part of why the first story is kind of clunky in that regard. I mean, I know a lot of people still love it. I don't want to, there's nothing wrong with that.
That's right.
But you can kind of tell that's how I converted it.
I got you. Now, to that regard, because this is something that I have a lot of interest in as well, and it's something that I find very, very fun in the creative process, in the opportunities that I've had to do it, both within the EMC community as well as out in vanilla life.
Yeah.
But the world building, the creating not just of characters, but of characters and places and timelines, events, and you start going down that path, and you understand why the Silmarillion is what it is, and why there is these troves of information and backstory and everything that J.R.R. Tolkien put together for Middle Earth, because it's so fun to just let your imagination chew through all of those different things.
Totally. And in fact, that means I have to give my first shout out really quickly, because Midas City, the name, I completely ripped that off 110%. Decker, who wrote Psych versus the Lash, that was the first one of his stories that were comic book influenced. He used Midas City, and we've been talking and kind of agreed they could be in the same sort of mixed universe.
Yep.
I thought the name was so great, I had none, I stole it. So that's like, I have to be completely upfront. That bit of world building, I'm really bad with names, so I just kind of swiped that.
Names are the worst. Names are the absolute worst. I'm one of those people when I'm writing something. Well, okay, just to give you an example, I've been outlining for a few months now an idea for a mind control screenplay, something that I would love to do one day if the situation allows for itself. And it's a fairly large cast. There's like sort of 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 main characters. And having to come up with names for 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 main characters is hell. It is pure hell, because I put so much emphasis on wanting the name to have meaning or to have a nickname. And of course, I have to know the story of how the nickname came about. And so now you got to go down that path of character history and all that stuff. And it's hellacious in terms of like what you will do to yourself for a good name, something that satisfies you, and yet at the same time, it's so addictively fun.
It's so. Whenever I sit down to like write anything these days, I always spend at least as long as I would writing a first big section of it. I'll be ready to go. I'll be sure, okay, I have everything, and then I'll do twice as much world building as I'm going to do writing that day, because there's always some small little detail that I've missed. Yeah. And when I was first writing, because I had no idea it was going to take me 2 years to write the first huge set, and then about 7 years in total to write the whole universe out, I was very, very loose and fast with the notes. And I saw before that you mentioned Scrivener, and I've always been really tempted to use a program like that. Yeah. But I'm a weird person when it comes to my writing, because I love using tech. I'm a very tech-oriented person, but all of my notes are in .txt files. Right. I have like 1 million .txt files. And as soon as I started out the second series, I had extensive notes about every character, everything from, obvious things like eye color, name, nickname, etc., which is especially bad because one of my few continuity errors that still drives me crazy is that one of the characters changes names, middle and last name between stories, which drives me crazy, to which character had the nicest ass, just so I didn't ever forget that, because that was going to come up at some point.
These are important details.
Exactly.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, we're kind of making light of it, but really, if you just sort of take out the who's got the nicest ass in your comic mythology, that is the kind of thing that, as an example, a big company like Marvel or DC, they would have a Bible and it would say, okay, who's the strongest character? And so, so Superman, and how strong, of course, now that changes, from time to time.
The big difference there is with Marvel or DC, they'd go to look and they'd cross it out.
Right. That doesn't work for the story. Screw this. But they would in fact have some compendium, some repository of that kind of information for writers to pull from. So if they said, well, we want to have somebody do X, Y, and Z, well, the character you're dealing with wouldn't probably be able to do that, but here's a list of characters that would.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I don't find that odd in any way. To me, that's the kind of thing that I do as a writer. It's the sort of thing that I really enjoy doing. And I remember listening to Frank Miller talk about Sin City, and it's really interesting to listen to him talk about his characters. And you can see that kind of there's a special kind of love between an artist and their creation, and it's very apparent when you have a lot of time to explore those characters in different situations. And you can see all like the Sarah, fun that you can have with them.
Yeah, by now, like with all the time I spent inside of Sarah's head, even though I haven't written anything with her in it for almost 8 years now, which is going to drive me crazy to think. Like she's, I don't want to say daughter because that sounds really terrible with some of the things I put her through. You wouldn't do that to a daughter at all.
Yeah,
but
you'd be a great parent if you were an Olympian.
Exactly, which goes into some of the deeper mythology that that was in there that. I'll be perfectly honest, I didn't plan nearly enough of it out, and it kind of shows as there's no foreshadowing except for little bits that I left as this is foreshadowing that eventually I'll have something. But
yeah, well, I don't know, like those kinds of things are I think a lot lately. Well, and it's just because I've really been in a writing mode as of lately. I've been doing a lot of screenplay writing lately, and it makes me think a lot about structure and a lot about story mechanics, and just the sort of the things that you will go through setting something up to pay off later, whether it's just some detail about a character or some big story point or that kind of thing. But I find all those aspects of writing, and I'm the kind of person that I probably do at least 80% more planning than I do writing. I will just do a lot of thinking and just really figuring out things that are really only casually connected to the story, and yet knowing them or thinking through the logic of how a process takes place, for some reason that really informs my process.
Oh yeah, and that was my biggest problem for the longest time. When I was younger, I always wanted to be the next Tolkien. Although I grew up reading Dragonlance, so I wanted to be the next Margaret Wise.
Right.
But same basic premise, except that I didn't have TSR behind me.
Yes.
But so I would spend all this time writing out fantasy worlds, and I have a couple of novellas that are absolute trash that I wrote back then, but it was all very incredibly derivative. Like I look back at it now, and it's all you can tell. It's Dragonlance, Final Fantasy, and like 3 or 4 other things. Star Wars is in there. It's an ugly mess.
That's where all of us start.
Oh yeah.
I once heard Keith Richards. This is in relation to musicians, but I think it's pretty applicable. Keith Richards talked about being a musician, and early on, you're just a sponge, and all you do is you just soak up the things around you, the things that you like and that influence you. And if you squeeze the sponge at that point, all you're going to get is those things. But as time goes on and the sponge becomes more and more saturated, those things begin to bleed out, and what's left is this amalgam of all of those things that is unique. And I found it incredibly cogent given his reputation. And quite insightful. I think that's absolutely true. Early on, you can totally see everyone's influences are very, very bare, I think, in the early years.
Yeah, and like my favorite little thing that I snuck in that like was totally unimportant, and I was waiting for. Let's see here, I have my list up here so I can see. I was waiting for something like 5 years to actually have it show off. The very first of the Electrum series has a character just has what I called Cuddle Me Red Shoes, because I thought it was a really cute way to describe not quite pink, not quite red shoes, because you always get Fuck Me Red everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was just a small little detail, but they pop up a few times, and it's like months and months between them. And so when that character finally shows up, it's like, wait, you were the... Oh. And I never got... Like that's the kind of thing that, you never really know if a whole bunch of people saw it or not, but you hope deep down that someone went back, read through it, and was just like, okay, that is awesome. Yeah. Because that was so fun to do.
That's right. And that's the whole thing. You hang those threads in the hope that even one person's going to come along and pull on it.
Exactly.
So you said that the whole Silver Girl mythos originally started as a role play, and I know that you are a role player. Mm-hmm. The thing that I'm curious about is did the erotic aspects in general and the mind control aspects specifically, were those originally a part of the role play, or were those things that you brought in as you decided that fiction would be a good outlet for this?
Oh, they were totally there from the beginning. I when I was quite a bit younger now, it's really crazy to think this was 10 years ago. I keep feeling like I'm that new writer that's like no one knows about, even though like I can look at this list of 98 stories. But it was basically just a friend of mine and I
You're
were
a new
just like
writer who types really fast.
that is I do drive people crazy with that sometimes. It's one of my things. But yeah, it was just the mind control was very much a core aspect of it from the very beginning. And in fact, I don't even think like there's any like sexual heat in the stories at all until you get into at least halfway through the second really long one. Though the one I wrote between that still has my worst typo ever, sopping in excess, which is supposed to be shopping in excess. And like I could go back. I know Simon would fix it if I emailed him because he's amazing.
Yeah.
But I've never wanted to do it because it's too terrible that it's there, and it's this little nugget of reminder that you should really, really, really check your things like 10 times before you post them.
And that's why you're a better artist than George Lucas. Moving on. Um,
That's actually a big thing. The early Silververse drives me crazy because I look back through it and I see what it could be, but every time I look over it and I go, okay, I could just polish this, I just think, and then I could redo the entire scene in Jabba's palace with a whole new song, and I just slap myself.
yeah, I'm the exact same way. As a matter of fact, it's something that I was thinking about talking on the podcast at one point. I just haven't done it yet. But
Yeah.
I've recently gone through this really interesting process that relates to updating technology on my website, moving away from Flash, but also archiving and backup. And I came the short version of the story is I came very, very close to losing the master files forever for a couple pieces of my work that I really didn't want to lose the master files for.
Yeah.
And I came very, very close to losing them forever. And anyway, I've been going back a lot through my older work lately, and I've been working on adapting it to a more modern sort of web browser paradigm.
Yeah.
And the temptation to go back and fix and polish is almost overwhelming. And in most cases, like typos, I will correct. Typos, yeah. I will correct because I have such a complex about my spelling and grammar that I can't really allow it. But wanting to go back and maybe just tweak a change of phrase, or wanting to go back into an image and I could do this better now. I've learned a technique since that I could accomplish this effect more readily and all that. Just that itch to take what you have now and apply it to what you created then is almost insurmountable. It's almost irresistible.
The thing I always have to keep in mind is it's a Da Vinci quote, but it's totally still true today, is art is never finished, only abandoned.
Yeah.
Because you could always make it better. Eventually, you just have to stop.
It is. It's absolutely true. But unfortunately, just going back to the George Lucas example, I think that he used that as an excuse to do it. I'm not sure if that was what Da Vinci or Leonardo was advocating.
No, it was not.
But in any case, the thing about the comic mythos is really interesting to me because as we have come along, and I don't know how far back you go in the mind control scene. I trace my exposure to the erotic mind control community to the mid to late 90s.
I wasn't really involved in the community.
Well, okay, community is the wrong word. The mind control scene, like being aware of websites on the internet that cater to erotic mind control and discovering that, that is really what I like.
Yeah. Well, I remember there was a really old Yahoo group that with the people that eventually went on to form the collective. I met up with them way back when.
Like Mesmerize and that kind
yeah. But I don't remember him specifically on there, but I know he had to be because it was that same group.
Yeah.
And I found MC Stories by being on nifty.org, reading a story that was also on the MC archive and thinking, I have to go out and find like a whole archive of this because this is amazing.
Yeah.
And doing a Google search for it, finding the EMCSA and seeing just that old green page and going, wait, there's no way this, and then closing it. And I'd go back like 5 times before I finally realized, no, this is a really awesome site. Quit going away from it. Now I love that color of green, so I don't even know.
It's very interesting. This is going to be another talk amongst yourselves, audience. It's very interesting to me, anyway. Green is the color of Mind Control Erotica. And I think part of it has become that green that you see at the archive. But also, some of the earliest photo manips that I remember seeing, which were from like William Lee and Private Pages, and this is going way back now.
Yeah.
But they really utilized green a lot in their sort of glow effects and things. And
I mean, think back to like Star Trek. What's like the biggest mind control thing that's that entire thing? The Borg with green everywhere.
Yeah. Now, we've just ventured into another really interesting thing that might be actually. We'll go ahead and talk about this. I was going to save this for another show, but screw it. We're going to do it now.
Go ahead.
I think, and this actually goes back to kind of what I was saying, but I got away from it. I'll kind of circle back to it, and this will almost seem planned. Is the different sort of sub-genres that have developed over the years within erotic mind control fiction. And you have things like superhero-based mind control fiction. We have tropes now, like the evil therapist, or the conspiracy theory fueled day spa, where brainwashing is going on behind the scenes and the massage rooms, things like that.
Yeah.
All right. One of my absolute favorite subgenres of EMC is the Hive.
Oh, yeah.
The Hive genre. Now, you being somewhat of a scholar of mind control fiction, and like myself, having spent a lot of your time reading great stories at this very simple, unassuming looking website, I would love to have a discussion with you, and we're going to come back to the Borg thing in a minute, but I'd love to have a discussion about where you think the Hive genre starts. For me, the earliest story I can remember reading is Trilby's Hive. But I know that there are some influences on that. Like I think that there's kind of pieces of it in other places, but in terms of what we consider to be that Hive genre, I think that it starts with Trilby, and I'm wondering if you agree or if you've got another answer for where that begins.
Well, my own like experience hitting on because Trilby is one of my favorite writers on the archive now, but when I first found it, I was quite a bit younger, and his writing is not like, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this that's as complimenting as I want it to be. It's very literary. And it's very deep, and you're not going to enjoy it a lot if you're a quick scanning teenager who's only half paying attention.
Oh yeah,
reading one-handed is not the best thing to do at the beginning of a Trilby story, or you're going to miss half of the point.
That's true.
So a lot of my reading with Trilby stories that when I first started on the archive were scanned the good bits. I've gone back now. In fact, I recently did like a huge read through of all of his stuff. But the first Hive story,
that sounds incredibly fun, by the way.
It was so fun. I have this huge text file I was compiling various tropes and triggers, and it's insane. I think I might write up a blog post about it at some point, but it's been a thing.
If you once you do that, we'll like come back on the show and do nothing but talk about that.
I'll have to go back and do that then. I was needing some motivation.
Yeah.
But the first story I remember reading that was Hive was, and I don't know if this 100% counts, but I think it does, was Thrall's 10-Pack of Trixies.
Yeah, which is a great story.
Yeah, I remember reading that as it was coming out. Every weekend I'd be running down to my computer as soon as I could, desperate to log on. Okay, is there more of it? Yes, and then read through it as quick as I could, which, nowadays I know how to actually savor a story. But I remember that one being first, and then after that, even though this is by no means early, I stumbled upon Tabako's Rouge, which then links back to Hive, saying that Hive was the inspirator for it. And then Trilby wrote Honeycomb, the sequel to Hive, which then says that Rouge inspired it, and that they each say that the other one's story is a better example of the Hive phenomena, which just amuses me to no end.
Yes, well, and you're talking about you're talking about, like the upper echelon. I mean, like basically like those three writers right there. Like for me, the big four are in no particular order: Trilby, Thrall, Tabako, and Iago.
Oh, yeah, no, like I throw Eye of Serpent in there too. Pretty much honestly, there's the Quick and Dirty anthology on the archive. You look at that name list and you just kind of have to just bow in awe because they're all amazing.
But you're totally right. Eye of Serpent. Okay, like to just carry the thrash metal analogy further, if Trilby, Tabaco, Iago, and Thrall are the Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax of the EMC world, then Eye of Serpent is like Black Sabbath.
Oh, yeah, I can totally see that.
I mean, and you want to talk about world building and mythology. I mean,
the ancients,
the world of the ancients and Coral d'Amber and that whole mythology. I mean, it's honestly awe-inspiring, and that's not hyperbole. That's not just I'm trying to think of some clever way to say it's really, really good. It's really, really good. In addition to the fact that the imagination and just I'm jealous of Eye of Serpent's imagination in all of the things that she weaves together, the mechanics of how the river kind of works through people and just all of these things. I mean, it's one of those things that like I look at and I say, I will never be able to do what this person has done. I'll have to go find something else to do because this has been done as good as it can be.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stands out the most whenever I think of just how powerful Eye's writing is that Trilby's second story on the archive, the sequel to Watering Hole, which the name's escaping me, I'm not going to click on it right now, credits the whole entire story being written because of the death of one of Eye's characters, inspiring a story needing to be written in like memoriam of them is how powerful that is.
Right.
So I don't feel like you can go higher than that. But yeah, that was sort of my introduction into the Hive as an idea, and I really have felt lately that that's been a huge gap in my own like writing because like I like to think of writing as a way to understand something as well as communicate it. So I sort of try and swallow up as much as I can about something and then regurgitate it through my own experiences, my own creative process. And then I feel like it's actually a part of me as opposed to just this distant concept that I understand.
Yeah.
And it's such a fun one. I can't believe I haven't done anything with it yet.
Give it time. So coming back to Hive, the Hive subgenre. This is, and this literally, when I sat down to do this podcast, when I said, okay, I'm thinking about doing an EMC podcast, what would I talk about?
Yeah.
And I wrote down a list of topics of things that I'd always wanted to just put out there. Things like the whole Yoko Ono Hypnodom thing from the last episode.
Yeah.
One of the things I wrote down, and I've been talking a little bit about this recently with Iago, is how I think that the Borg of Star Trek: The Next Generation, for those who might not know, the original Borg episodes, the two-parter from season 2,
yeah,
I think that has had an incredible influence on the Hive genre of EMC, and so many of the kind of the rules, rules in air quotes for those who didn't hear that. So many of the rules of the Hive subgenre, I think, are basically laid out in the Borg of TNG, and just certain things like walking through the Hive, but not immediately being captured as an intruder, being sort of free to move amongst the Hive and to see the Hive and to see all of the drones and everything that comprise it, but them just going about what they're doing and kind of ignoring you. Like that's almost always a part, however it's accomplished, whether it's through subterfuge or some other means, but whatever the mechanic that gets you there, that's almost always going to be part of it.
Yeah, that's definitely, and the actual first Borg episode was like I want to say that was when Q propelled them away, which is totally like nerding out and not important. But like that very first when they're just walking through and they're just like opening up shelves and that's a baby and just nothing cares, and that's the most vulnerable part of this civilization. And no, you can do that. We're all way too out of it to care.
Yeah, because you're no threat to us.
Exactly. And if you were a threat to us, we just swallow you up, and now you are no threat to us.
And now that's the other specific thing. The other specific thing, although we don't know that initially in that Borg episode. It comes later after the Best of Both Worlds two-parter. But if you sort of have that later knowledge and go back and watch that episode, what the implicit threat, what creates the tension, is not just the oh, they'll discover us and we'll be captured or we'll be killed, or some threat of violence.
Yeah.
The tension is built upon the implication that if you are caught by them, you will become one of them. And of course, that is the cornerstone of Hive erotica within the EMC world.
Yeah, and then the serial recruitment that builds off of that is totally another cornerstone. The thought that not only will you be converted and all of your memories will be picked apart for any little weakness of your friends, but you will probably be the reason all of your friends are converted too.
That's exactly right, and that sort of driving thing to the thing that's interesting about Hive fiction is how it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense to think about it too deeply, because any sort of societal model like that is kind of unsustainable in a way. It's like, well, if the Hive does nothing but just gobble up everyone who comes into contact with it, then at some point there's just not going to be anybody left. And so it's always kind of interesting to see, like how little of that kind of greater worldview is explored in a lot of these stories.
That's what I really liked about Rouge, because it was set in a distant future time. And spoilers, apologies. It's been out for a while.
It has.
It's set on Mars, and they actually go into those details. They're all like one of the important things. They're all growing. What was it?
Soybeans. Soybeans. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're building a sustainable food model.
Yeah, and they're not like just the core idea is not just gobbling up just anybody, because that's why do you want just anybody?
That's right.
But carefully selecting core people, unless you break in, and then just bonus.
Yeah. But now technically, because at the end of the story they say that the whole break-in was basically a planned operation to test their security. So that being the case, it stands to reason that perhaps all of those people were selected because of the fact that we'll just assimilate them because they're good candidates anyway.
Yeah, they were good enough to be able to stay. Well, most of them were good enough to be able to stay with their own brains intact for a little bit. So, clearly they're good members of, yeah. Can't really blame them, though. I mean, that was some facility.
No, the thing that there's just so many interesting things, and while we all agree that we like erotic mind control fiction and women being brainwashed and turned into hive drones and things like that, the individual things that will push our buttons I'm sure, are very, very different. But some of the things that I think are really fun about that genre is the amount of time that it typically takes to kind of set up. And honestly, I think Trilby's Hive is it's probably one of the shortest ones.
Yeah.
I think Rogue is I think it's like 4 parts. 10 Pack of Trixies is multiple parts. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head now. But spending enough time inside that character's head for the tide to turn, as it were, for that character to realize that something's happened, that they're compromised, and to see that slow transition from, okay, this place is getting to me, but I'm fine. This place is getting to me, but I'm fine. I'm not fine. Something's wrong. Uh-oh. And then, it's too late.
Yeah.
And that's just delicious. That kind of slow heat. I like that in general in stories. In general, I like the kind of the transition and moving through that and spending some time on it, which Trilby is excellent at. He absolutely one of the best.
Definitely.
At writing that whole thing. I can't do it. So I tend to shortcut those things. I tend to be like, this happens and this happens and then this happens and then slave.
Well, that's part of the advantage you get with visuals, which is not to say that it's any lesser, but when you have to work to your medium.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. It's like when you have lots of narration in a movie, what are you doing? You could be showing some of this if you're not showing too. And when you have the ability to just write out everything to be able to get in as close as you need to and then back up as far as you need to. I mean, for example, another good example, it's less sort of Hivey in a sort of distant way would be like Trinkets, where you have the entire first set of the story set aboard the cruise ship, where you're slowly breaking down all these inhibitions. You're getting everyone just used to, oh yeah, this is my time to be controlled. Cool. And you just have that sort of building until you have it so they arrive at the island, and now the idea of frolicking around half naked and being part of it, or naked and being part of a tribe, is just so totally normal. And you get to go in close to the characters as this happens, and then pull back to sort of see, wait, anyone who still had a half of a brain cell still firing normally would tell this is crazy.
This is absolute insanity. And then, of course, you get to the other side of the island, and you kind of see, you sort of see the machinations going on behind the scene, churning this whole thing. And the one of the things that I kind of love, just to break off and talk about that a little bit, is I love the way that Trilby treats mind control in the broader scope of the world, and what he sets up in Trinkets, has reverberations on down through a lot of his stories. One of my favorite follow-ups to that is, I believe it's called Recovery. It's about one of the she's a slave of the Isle Dominion or Dominion conspiracy, and they're attempting to deprogram her. She's recovering in a hospital, and it's the one that's got that delicious bit of business between the hypnotist. Spoilers everyone.
Yeah.
The hypnotist from the cruise ship and her doctor.
Oh,
that is delicious.
That hotel scene, just from the beginning when they first get into the hotel to glass breaking, and I don't have to say anything more than that. Yeah. Just that whole process is perfect.
It is incredible. Some of my absolute favorite stuff that Trilby has done is in that story. It's one of the ones that I've gone back to most often, just because it's so good. And every time I go back and read it, there's I'll find some new thing about it that I hadn't really discovered before. Some line of dialogue, or some little bit of foreshadowing or whatever that just makes it all the sweeter.
Yeah, and then there was the one little flashback that got turned into its own story that was nice to sort of see how that blossomed out too. It's that whole series is really it's only disappointing that there's one of them that's unfinished. It drives me crazy every time I get to it when I'm going through them all. What was that one? Changeling.
Yeah.
Though I completely understand why it is, and like a few of my friends joked, well, then you can finish writing it. And it's like, okay, I respect you, but you're telling me to write a Trilby Ellis story now.
I think in one of the early episodes of this podcast, I talked about somebody on Reddit rewriting. I can't remember the name of the story now. I think it's Legacy. Yeah.
Legacy.
And rewriting Trilby Ellis. And I was just thinking, like, basically you would basically have to be completely ignorant. I mean that literally. I don't mean that as an insult. You would literally have to know nothing about Trilby Ellis to be able to do that. Because if you knew anything about Trilby Ellis, I think that it would be your reaction. Just be like, what?
Yeah, because like the strongest thing that through all of his work that reverberates from the very beginning to the end of Legacy, which is the last one that got finished. I think that was the last thing they published, is the idea of betrayal, that no control is really all that strong if you aren't willing to betray everything you care about, and that there's nothing quite as erotic as seeing someone realize that they would give up their firstborn and get off on it, and that they're totally fine with that, or that they're horrified, but they still don't want to stop themselves, and they can't.
Well, and that's the thing about Trilby that I've always loved. Trilby infused a level of drama in his work that, frankly, I've been chasing ever since. I aspire to create drama that intense, and that's the thing. He raised the stakes on mind control and said, okay, if you really do have total control over somebody, then how do you really show what that's worth? Having total control over another human being is only worth something if you can somehow show the audience the gravity of that power, and that's what Trilby's great at. And I think other than just betrayal being wrong, therefore hot, it also works devastatingly well as a device, as a kind of prover for control.
Oh, yeah. Plus, another thing that Trilby really did well, and that all of the greats that we've mentioned, is not being afraid to show that your mind controllers are terrible people and that what they're doing is wrong. Whenever a story and I like some of the because all of these people have written super sweet ones. I mean, you got Tabitha wrote Winterflesh, Trilby wrote Dreamtime.
Winterflesh
They're
is so good.
Such great stories, and there's so many like stories with Carell just being, especially after some of the horrible things that happened, just being very soothing. Those are all really great stories, but you see like when you get to see into the hypnotist from the, I can't remember the name of the ship now, it's going to kill me, from Trinkets. She is a horrible, terrible person.
Yeah, I can't,
totally irredeemable.
I can't remember the name of the ship, but it's like Queen's, well, that's the name of the like Queen's
like Resorts.
Yeah, that's the
Queen. Yeah.
No, you're totally right. I think that's, I don't know, it feels right, it feels realistic, it works as a trope. It sets up, your whole sort of arch villain archetype. It's great stuff. One thing I wanted to mention, and I don't know if this I don't think this person was in our prep list, but thinking about Hive infiltration, one thing I would like to shout out is Zorkmeister. Zorkmeister did a great Hive story, and I believe it's called Incursion. I'm going to look it up here.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Okay, Incursion, Zorkmeister, yeah, and it's fantastic. It really, and of course, I mean, he calls out specifically to Rogue, to Hive, to Honeycomb. Another one that we forgot is Salvation, which is a joint effort between Tabico and Thrall. That's got some great stuff in it. As a matter of fact, although it did not come to mind initially, but specific things about Salvation also really, in my mind, kind of establish certain tropes, which is the idea of trying to rescue somebody from the Hive and that person not wanting to be rescued.
Which is only natural. Why would you want to be rescued from supreme bliss that you've been taught to adore?
That's exactly right. Well, although it's not exactly a Hive... Well, no, actually it is. Well, it is a Hive story.
It is.
And you know what the one I'm going to say is Blue. From Tabico. That line where I think it's Ginger, but after they've managed to get the minder off of the one character, and they're going through the catacombs, either trying to find a way out or trying to find somebody else. And one of the characters says to her, what was it like? Because she seems very distracted. He says, "Are you okay? Yeah. What was it like?" And she says, "It was perfect. I can only imagine that heroin comes close." Something like that, like describing slavery, and she says, "I've got one of the most brilliant minds on the planet, and I'm having to force myself to not run to these things and be slave labor for them for the rest of my life because it feels so good." And it's one of those like rare moments where just saying it really, really works, because you always want to kind of like take a curveball, or you want to kind of approach it indirectly, but she just flat out says it there, and it's so good.
Oh yeah, that's another great trope, is the idea of control as an addiction.
Yes.
The idea of mind control being something that that whatever you're going to do is going to further brainwash you, but it's going to feel way too good. Why would you not want that? And once you have it, you've already got it, and then it's so easy to take another hit, and then you're puddle on the floor.
I think that there's something very relatable about that too. And I understand that that not all, and I want to just pause for a second and say I'm not trying to make light of addiction, which is a terrible issue that many people have to deal with in various ways, and I have dealt with many times indirectly. But not making light of that, but there is something about that aspect of addiction and mind control that I think is relatable. I think that all of us, even if we are not ourselves actually addicts to something that is destructive, I think that all of us can understand that impulse of, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to. Whether it's dessert or skipping brushing our teeth, or whatever it is. Yeah. I think that we can all relate to that impulse, and so again, it's a great way of connecting the audience to the material.
And if you don't have a feeling that there has to work that this is happening, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. It's just like if it's just instantaneous, that person, there was nothing, it was just 1 second, they're completely normal, functional, and then it's just all gone. That can work if you do it right, but there has to be a certain understanding of that humanity that's lost. Otherwise, it's no different than just a TV that you change the channel on. There's no emotional connection to that, and that wrongness.
I agree. It kind of helps you accomplish, the end goal. Well, it's just kind of storytelling 101. And if there's nothing at stake, then there's not really a story worth telling, I guess.
Yeah, you need conflict. Even if it's just a conflict that's already been decided, there needs to be something visually at stake, something struggling, and you can do that sometimes, but maybe it's a sequel to something, or maybe it's a following on, or the thing that's struggling is so minute, but there's something there, or you're not really writing a story.
All right, I believe that is going to do it for this episode. I want to thank my guest, Madame Kistoulat, for a very, very fun conversation. And if you've enjoyed our talk, don't worry, because this is only the beginning. There'll be more of my chat with Madame Kistoulat coming up on the next 2 episodes of the Black Room podcast. We're going to talk more about what we love in erotic mind control fiction and discuss some of the authors and artists that we both share a love for. So stay tuned for that. I'd like to encourage everyone to go and check out the show's official page at my website, which is podcast.calidus-mc.com. There you're going to find links to everything that was discussed in this episode. And of course, I always invite you to leave your comments, your questions, and suggestions on the show. I really appreciate all your feedback. Thanks again for joining me. I'll see you next time on The Black Room. Until then, farewell.